fire and conflict. It seems it should not appear on campus. However, all of these actually happen.
This law has been demonized in various parts of the world, and the fact that this has happened is well known by many people in Hong Kong.
Let them study these laws themselves.
But even reading the law, they don't know where is the red line. They are just trying to test the water. They're just trying to test the law.
Why should we entertain people who want to test the limits of the law?
So how are we going to protect the judiciary and how are we upheld the rule of law?
The judiciary is fundamental to the rule of law, and if people are going to have confidence in Hong Kong's legal system, then we need a strong, independent judiciary delivering impartial judgments. No matter how much criticism there may be of particular magistrates or indeed judges, we must never have a situation where judges are always looking over their shoulder because they're afraid of criticism, rather than taking the decisions they believe to be right. I mean, it would be intolerable if Hong Kong ever came to the situation whereby a magistrate was considering how to sentence someone, and he says to himself, having heard all the mitigation, well, I think this sentence is what's required, but I daren't pass that sentence. I better pass this sentence, otherwise I'll face huge criticism, and they might write to my boss asking for my head on a plate, you see, which would be intolerable. So fundamental to our legal system is that magistrates are protected from severe criticism of that type, unless of course it's justified, and that they feel secure enough to take the decisions which they believe to be just in all the circumstances. That's how our system has always operated, and I hope it will always continue in the same way. And this, of course, is recognised in the Basic Law itself, Article 85, which makes clear that judges exercise their jurisdiction independently, free from any interference. So long as that remains the case, and I believe it must remain the case, then our present system will have to be protected, and judges and magistrates should be free to impose the sentences they believe to be right, subject, of course, always to the power of the Department of Justice to seek a review if they do make a mistake and get things corrected that way. But so I think a lot of the criticism which is directed at the magistrates is probably unjustified. Some of it is justified, but they must continue to do what they believe to be right, having heard the evidence, having applied the law to the evidence, and used their own judgment in all the circumstances.
Yes,
and they must always be protected from undue pressure. But as Geoffrey Ma has said, that if complaints are justified under our system, and I won't say they welcome complaints, but they accept that complaints will be made, but they must always be properly based.
Correct.
And of course, as we've seen quite recently, there have been concerted attempts from other parts of the world to undermine our criminal justice system. We've seen a number of countries, led by the United States, actually suspending their extradition treaties with Hong Kong. And they've given very bogus reasons, in my view, for doing that. They said, well, there's a possibility that if we send people back to Hong Kong, they might be sent up to mainland China for trial. And of course, that's absolute nonsense. And that's nonsense for two reasons. First of all, if you're sending someone back to Hong Kong in a rape case or a robbery case or a drug trafficking case, then there's no question of them being sent to Beijing for trial. The case will be dealt with here. And that's the first basis. And the second basis, of course, is that under the existing surrender of fugitive offender agreements, which Hong Kong has with other parts of the world, or extradition agreements as they're often called, there are inbuilt protections. So if a particular country is concerned that there might be a political dimension to the case, then they are justified in refusing to extradite someone to Hong Kong, and vice versa. But of course, if you're dealing with a case of a drug trafficker, or you're dealing with a rapist, or you're dealing with a robber, there's no political dimension there. It's a straightforward crime case. So the decision to suspend those treaties is wholly illogical. It just doesn't make any sense at all. And the only people who will benefit from that are the criminals themselves. And one can only explain what's happened by saying it's a deliberate attempt to undermine the criminal justice system in Hong Kong. Whereas paradoxically, it's actually hurt those countries more, because the figures since 1997 show that Hong Kong has sent back fugitives to those countries far more than they have sent to us.
So what is the effect of now? Some countries, they cancel the fugitive
well, they haven't cancelled them, they've suspended them.
Yeah.
A number of countries have suspended them. Some of the others, such as France, have said that there were ongoing negotiations towards having an extradition or surrender of fugitive offender agreement, they've now suspended those negotiations.
Yeah.
So in effect, they're frozen. And so the message has gone out to Hong Kong criminals that if you commit an offence and escape to the United States or New Zealand or Australia or any of these sort of places, then you'll be safe.
You won't be sent back.
You won't be sent back for trial. So that's a terrible message to send out. So that's one example of an attempt to undermine criminal justice here. And of course another attempt is the calls around the world for foreign judges sitting in the Court of Final Appeal as non-permanent judges to withdraw, because the non-permanent judges make a great contribution to the Court of Final Appeal and to the development of its jurisprudence. And they have been, because they've done such good work since 1997, the judgments which have been produced have been recognised throughout the common law world as of great stature and are regularly quoted in other jurisdictions. And the local Hong Kong judges have themselves said that they found it very useful as well to have experts coming in and contributing to the discussions on particular cases. So those calls for these judges to be withdrawn are part and parcel of the same momentum to try and damage criminal justice in Hong Kong, which is very sad to see. But fortunately, that doesn't seem to be happening so far, and we must hope that it doesn't happen in future.
Yeah. So, Oscar, do you think that a suspension of those treaties not to be enacted in Hong Kong will undermine the criminal justice in Hong Kong?
It will affect not just Hong Kong, the whole world, okay, will suffer, because the idea of international police cooperation, okay, has always recognized the need to disregard borders, okay. That's why we freely exchange intelligence, okay, with overseas police agencies, because that's how we don't fall behind too much, okay, behind the criminals, okay. And this is important for the overall good of the whole world, and for some countries to take the decisions to politicize, these important devices is very unfortunate for the whole world.
Yeah, and I think this is the main issue for the FOO last year. Why we are having such a chaos on these issues? When we look back to last year, we have such 8 months of unrest.
Fire and conflict. It seems it should not appear on campus. However, all of these actually happened.
Attack some random building, whatever, at least if there's some cause, it's more logical. You can kind of see where they're coming from.
Fall on fire, so it could happen.
And social unrest, and also I think we have already arrested around 9,000 people.
Yeah, over 10,000.
Yeah, over 10,000 people, and only 2,000 of them are being charged.
2,200 something.
Yeah. So why the number is so low? I would say it's low because if we are arrested for 10,000 people, and then just 1/5 of the people getting arrested or being charged.
Well, first of all, you have to understand these are serious cases, and we all know how much effort these people put into hiding their identity. Okay, wearing masks, okay, changing clothes, okay, putting umbrellas out, okay, to hide their identities and their criminal acts. All these complicate the investigations, and it would take a lot of time and effort, okay, to actually sift through the evidence. The only responsible way to actually go about this is to be careful and painstaking, okay, in your selection of the evidence and how you present them, and all these have to be approved, okay, by the Department of Justice, okay, because ultimately they decide whether the cases ought to be prosecuted in court. So the police force have been working very hard, okay, in this kind of conditions to actually finish the investigations. So there is good reason why, okay. Up to now, we can only prosecute 2,000 odd people. It is worthy to note that of those people that we have put to court, over 80% of them have been dealt with by some form of judicial intervention, ranging from binding over order to custodial sentence. Over 80%. Over 80% of them. So the success rate is very, very high. At the end of the day, I think the society needs to know this. Irrespective of what your personal political ideals are, this is a society governed by law. The rule of law basically says that you cannot commit crime without paying the price. All right? We need to do everything possible to make sure that people continue to believe this, and for people who have somehow wrongly believed the opposite of that, okay, to come back and say, wow, okay, I was mistaken because I've believed this certain professor who said I can actually break the law, and for good.
學生，所有支持香港嘅市民，支持民主嘅香港市民，我哋會一齊去開始一個新嘅時代。
Violence may sometimes be the solution.
而呢個案底令到佢哋人生變得更加精彩啊！
So that's what I think.
There's a very bad message for the public.
Yeah, I might even say that, okay, when someone says that, that's a direct assault on the idea of the rule of law. And somehow, somewhere, there should be a very strong message by someone to say, no, you're wrong. Okay, if you break the law, you'll be punished in court.
Well, of course, these 2,000 cases that have been taken to court so far, many others are still being processed. And don't forget, this is all on top of the regular police work. So this is actually amazing how well they've done to get these cases on expeditiously. And of course, the Department of Justice does have a specialised team known as the Public Order Event Team, which a group of dedicated prosecutors who are familiar with public order cases. But they have to spend many, many hours looking at videos and going through endless statements in order to assess the evidence which the police have presented them with. And obviously that all takes a lot of time. But I think certainly in comparison with 2014, where you may remember there were quite serious criticisms of the prosecution authorities for taking so long to make decisions on cases, 3-4 years, even 5 years sometimes. I get the impression that these cases are being dealt with far more efficiently this time, which is reassuring, because quite clearly the sooner these cases can be brought on for trial, then the better it is for everyone, including the suspects.
So I think the police has already done what they can do with the cases, because after the arrest, they do an investigation and they send the whole file, all the information to the DOJ. But I think it's the DOJ's, the time constraint is on the DOJ, that they have to expedite the whole process on reviewing or giving out legal opinion, whether they proceed with the case. So maybe the deadlock is on them.
Well, I'm sure the DOJ is already trying their hardest, okay, to cope with the workload. So, if we are experience the pressure because of the difficulty in the investigation, I'm sure, okay, they also face the pressure of having to deal with, okay, all the evidence that we present to them. So I think, to be fair, okay, everyone is trying their hardest already to cope with this. But I'd like to pick up on Grenville's earlier comment about, how well the police have been doing.
Yeah.
Because we haven't forgotten about, the average daily policing. And if you're careful to pay attention to what happens on a daily basis, we are still investigating the usual crime that happens on a daily basis. And we solve those cases in many cases very quickly, okay? Robberies, okay, within a week, okay, we arrest, the people responsible, rape cases as well. So I think Hong Kong people need to know that they are very fortunate. My honest opinion is that they are very fortunate to have this kind of police force working hard for them, okay, despite the immense pressure put on our men and women, and the unfair accusation and attacks and the psychological torture of our members and our families, that we still, stood by our sworn duty. I have many colleagues from overseas agencies, okay, who secretly, quietly told me that they knew if the same thing that happened in Hong Kong last year had happened in their jurisdictions, there is no way their force could have coped with that. And I think, ironically, okay, since the George Floyd incident in the US, okay, similar unrest have broken out in the rest of the world, and it's plain to see, okay, how these events turned out.
Yeah,
and in some cases,
compare. I don't think.
And in some cases, okay, the entire police stations have been abandoned. Okay, nothing like that happened in Hong Kong.
Yeah, I think the police has done a very good job over the last years and this year. After we have the national security law being enacted, and do you think it can settle the unrest for what we have left over from last year?
表決通過授權人大常委會制定港區國安法，涵蓋嚴重危害國安嘅行為同活動。立法之後直接喺香港頒布實施，中央可以喺香港設機構履行國安職責。
I think the objective, observation is that okay, the frequency, of incidents have reduced, and the intensity, okay, of any confrontation has also reduced. But I think it is too early to say that this piece of legislation will be the solution to every problem, because I think the deadliest element, okay, of such widespread social unrest is not actually the criminal acts themselves, the physical acts themselves, but it's the idea that you can actually go out there and commit crime with impunity. And I think this idea has somehow, pervaded through the whole society. And a certain sector of this community have been radicalized, okay? And these elements will remain radicalized. And there's no telling how and when, okay, they would express that kind of radical extremist thoughts. So I think we have to accept, the fact that since the unrest last year, Hong Kong has changed fundamentally. And there will always be this risk that we might face some sporadic but serious public disturbances or even acts of terrorism. I think in that regard is very worrying. And simply having the national security legislation, okay, by itself, okay, cannot mitigate against those risks.
So Oscar's quite right. I mean, it obviously has helped, but equally the police mustn't let their guard down. I mean, as he well knows, within days of the new law coming in, the police were able to stand down quite substantial numbers of their riot squad officers. I think it was 4,000. So they were able then to return, presumably, to their regular policing duties, which would again make the streets far safer and business people far more secure. So that is a very welcome development, because it means that Hong Kong will be able to return to being one of Asia's safest cities again. And as you well know, quite a few people who were involved in organising the protests have scaled down their activities. Various suspect organisations have been dissolved. Some people have left Hong Kong very quickly. So it is having the effect, and one of the most encouraging signs, I think, has been the reaction of business. The Hong Kong General Chamber of Commerce, the major banks, the major hotel groups and so on, they have all welcomed the enactment of this legislation, because it has the potential, and the signs so far are positive, it has the potential to restore peace and stability to Hong Kong, which of course is exactly what business wants if it's going to succeed and people are going to make money. So the signs so far, I would say, are positive.
How are we going to educate the public, or maybe the judges or the police officers on this law? Because I think everyone knows that there is a NSL, but what's in there? How are we going to enact it? How are the police going to enforce it? I think people need some time to adapt it.
Well, of course, the government has been mounting educational programs almost every night, I believe, on some of the television networks, 1-hour bulletins explaining, 1-minute bulletins rather, explaining different aspects of the new law, education through the schools, education through seminars, obviously more transparency, more booklets being promoted. Obviously, that's the only way it can be done.
And also in the judicial schools. Teaching the judges.
The judiciary would obviously need to know about the implications of the new law as well.
Yeah.
And of course, they've already handled the first case, so it's going to be very interesting to see how the judiciary respond once the cases start going to trial.
Yeah.
I have a slightly different point to make here. Okay, I think we're so used to discussing about the effects of one piece of legislation or one offence, okay, how it's defined in law. You know, people often discuss, okay, will it catch me? Okay, will I inadvertently commit that crime? And I think this is something very unusual, and it only happens in Hong Kong. In any of the other jurisdictions, okay, the average citizen will never engage in a serious discussion about, okay, how can I make sure that I don't commit a crime? Yeah. Because simply, you can just, well, don't commit a crime, okay? Don't even think about committing a crime, okay? Because the national security legislation is about really serious activities with really bad intentions for your country and your society. Normal human being won't think like that, you know, non-stop. So, you know, I think it's an overblown issue to say we need to educate every single citizen, because most people will not find this a relevant issue for them in their daily lives. People who need to study this are those who actually harbor very bad intentions for the country and our society. I would say, okay, let them study these laws themselves.
But even reading the law, they don't know where is the red line. They are just trying to test the water. They're just trying to test the law.
Why should we entertain people who want to test the limits of the law? In any society, okay, the majority of the citizens, okay, ought to be told, okay, you ought to stay here, okay, which is very far away from the threshold of criminal behavior. But it looks like we are now into this habit of telling everyone, okay, the threshold of criminal behavior is here on this line, okay, let's get really close to it without crossing it. And I think that's a pathology, okay, really unique to Hong Kong, and we need to stop that.
Of course, this law has been demonized in various parts of the world, and the fact that this has happened is well known by many people in Hong Kong. So it's important, I think, certainly to an extent, that people know a bit about it, and to know why what is being said about it in foreign places has no real basis. So if people can understand it in a fairly basic sort of way, as they understand, for example, the law of robbery or the law of theft or whatever it may be, then I think that would probably be beneficial, rather than knowing nothing about it and just hearing what other people say about it. If they had an opportunity to have things explained to them in a fairly simple sort of way, I think that would be beneficial.
So what we can do based on what we have now, we have a good police force, we have a good judicial system. So how are we going to make Hong Kong more stable, and how are we going to see our future?
Well, first of all, do not believe in the propaganda peddled by the Western media. I quote you an example. Okay, back on the national security law. Okay, the national security legislation is being labelled as a draconian. Okay, NSL, a sweeping NSL. Okay, and I would say, which country has national security legislation that is not draconian? What exactly do you mean by saying sweeping? We don't even have the complete set of behavior addressed by our present national security legislation. There are some other missing pieces. So if you have to say sweeping, okay, it's every other country's national security legislation that is sweeping is definitely not ours. So this is propaganda. And I think for intelligent Hong Kong people, they need to know this, okay? We are in the middle of this geopolitical contest between China and some Western countries led by the US. They are making use of every available excuse to label China as a threat. And many of these accusations are outright false and also unfair. And we cannot allow ourselves to be brainwashed, okay, by such propaganda and actually believe that we live in a dangerous place. So I think that would be a start to actually understand the truth.
Well, of course, the national security law has inbuilt into it various human rights and trial guarantees. It makes clear in Article 4 that the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights applies in the application of this particular law. The rights to a fair trial are guaranteed, the presumption of innocence, the rights to lawyers, they're all there. And if people understood this sort of thing, then I'm sure that their minds would be put at rest. But unfortunately, this has largely been overlooked, or it hasn't been fully explained. So quite clearly, this has to be made far clearer to people, I would have thought, going forward.
So thank you, Mr. Kwok and Mr. Grenville Cross. And please subscribe to us. And also, if you have any questions, please leave us a message.
Good, thank you, Eunice. Well done.
Very good.